This is day 6 of the January and preceding December 93 7-day retreat in California. Since yesterday's talk, I've received a number of written notes containing questions or comments. One so recently that I have not even had time to read it. It is long, so that will have to wait for another time to be gone into. So I haven't written down anything, but we will just look at these notes. And see what happens. I won't read them all this time. I'll just read one by one. Some of them are short and can be looked into, I think, in short time. Others may be longer. We'll see. This says, day 6 a.m. When you give talks, I feel myself located within a very authoritarian structure. True, it is less authoritarian than the Zen center I am a part of. But here, where there's an emphasis on disassembling authority, I notice what seems to be a contradictory practice. Not opening up the lecture space to questions. Grateful for a comment. It would be nice to open up this question in a group of 10, which we have twice a day, so other people can participate in it. But here it is, the question. We've all heard it. And in reading it, I'm wondering myself, what is authoritarian about the structure in which a talk such like this is given? Is it the fact that one person sits in front of many? 2 microphones, a tape recorder and a video recorder. Maybe someday there'll be video recorders both ways. So each one also is in there, because we are in this together. The camera may not record it, or the tape recorder may not. But as far as I'm concerned, we're all in here, listening and looking. It is all of our questions that come up and are being entered into commonly, together. But the setup, one person here, poised microphones, others there. I don't see it this way, of course, I'm most of the time not looking. Makes it easier to feel just as one, and also to see what one is saying. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, which was mentioned by either the same person or another in a group meeting, was why only one person talking? Why do we hear everything out of Toni's mouth? In a retreat like this, there's only one person talking during the talk. But as we all know, many, many human beings are talking everywhere. Maybe right now, at least a dozen or hundreds of talks are being given someplace in this world. And everyone, at least who comes to these talks, is free to go to any other talk. To listen wherever one feels drawn to listen. Even participating in this retreat, there's no requirement for anyone to come to this talk. You're here on your own volition. Yes, we have disassembled authoritarian structures and symbols. I used to, in giving a talk, be surrounded by all kinds of implements, a lectern and an attendant bowing, putting the stick down on the lectern on one side, and a book being carried high, bowed and handed to me, from which to read if I was inclined to read. A very ceremonial and beautiful way of bringing the drinking cup. Now it's just sitting someplace. And the other day I kicked it over. There's no image or sculpture behind me as there used to be, establishing a symbolic connection with a tradition, with the authority of a tradition. That indeed has been disassembled. What is left is talking. I don't feel I'm talking to you. I feel we're examining things together. This is my feeling. And maybe we can enter into this. We said it at the very beginning. Can we enter into what is being said, not take it as pronouncements from an authority to be revered or committed to memory as the holy truth, the only truth, but to question together. Most of the time I don't make statements, sometimes I do, but they're open to questioning by everyone, including myself. So please, if a question arises in your mind about something that has been said, and we mentioned that very early, I think during the first talk, bring it up in a meeting. Challenge what you've heard. These are very welcome components of a meeting. Challenging what has been said. Saying, say that again, I didn't get it, or I don't agree with you. It happens often very rarely. It's good. Immediately an energy infused into the meeting, because everybody now needs to examine again, including myself, look freshly, and one can feel the energy of inquiry and wondering and looking and dialoguing together. This is why we now have group meetings in addition to individual meetings. We have expanded them. Only in California are there 2 10-member group meetings a day, and there was even pressure for having a third one in the morning. But since there's also a great demand for individual meetings, we're trying to even it out. Now, as to why don't you have questions right during the talk? That too has been examined. I've brought it up twice, at least, to a talk audience in Springwater, not during retreat, but outside of retreat when I give talks. Someone had brought it up. Couldn't we ask you questions during the talk if you don't understand something or disagree, so it's not so authoritarian? And the overwhelming response from the people was present was, please, don't talk, and we'll put our questions down and ask you later. Don't interrupt the flow, because for an audience of 50 people, there may be 50 different times where someone needs to ask something. Maybe not. Maybe very few would. I don't know. But what we did institute is that I give shorter talks outside of retreat or in workshops, and then it's open for questioning right then and there after the talk. This has been very good. But the request was, don't do that in retreat, please. Let's use meetings for that. Because often in retreat, we come here out of silence. And we go into silence. Sometimes this is a very, very fine time to ponder or look into or let reverberate. not just what was said, but what resonated within, what it triggered or elicited within, beckoning to look further, to question anew, and not to interrupt that during a retreat with immediate questions, just to let the thing be there and work on its own. Please, if the writer of this note has not been to 4 meetings yet, do, and this has not satisfied what was said, please do come and see us in a group or in an individual meeting. We'll go over it. I want to be open to, not just I want to, I think I am, to what people think and feel and suggest about the format of what we're doing. So it will not become encrusted, just we're doing it because we've always done it. Let's always be clear and clarifying. That keeps something alive. If you think it is worthwhile, please compare or contrast shikantaza and just open listening. Last but not least, how about faith, God, truth? We'll talk about all of that. The faith, God, truth will come in the end, but but the question comes up very, very often, usually early, not on day 6, usually on day 1 or 2. Somebody comes who is practicing shikantaza. Shikantaza meaning, for some people who are not familiar with the Japanese Zen term, means just sitting. Actually, just to sit. Not hit the sitter, it doesn't mean that. Just sitting. Is one just sitting? Just sitting, open to what's happening, inside, outside. The quietness, the leaves, the sun, the rain, the thoughts coming up, the emotions, the wonderings, sensations in the body. Is one just open to that? Then that's open sitting. Call it whatever language or name you choose. But from my own experience, having trained in a Zen center, where shikantaza was not the practice, but it was tolerated. And I mean it. A person who was doing shikantaza that was maybe 1 in a retreat of 60 or 2 was told you can come to Doksan to meeting once, but the rest you don't need it. The meetings were for people who worked on koans. And having briefly also done that practice and heard it mentioned in talks addressing those who were doing shikantaza, I always mentioned that you're already a Buddha as you are. You're already enlightened as you sit. You just have to realize it. The only thing it needs is great faith in what the Buddha said, that we're all enlightened as we are. So you, as you're sitting, are already a Buddha. Something to that effect. And as we examine the words with which people talk to us, about us, and which we adopt and talk to ourselves, about ourselves, has a great impact, doesn't it? If I sit there thinking I'm already a Buddha, which means perfection, enlightenment, truth, then will I let thoughts about my dishonesty this morning come to the fore? Or will the image have a powerful effect on what is permitted into awareness and what is not? And at moments of depression, discouragement, will I think, well, after all, I'm a Buddha, and will that sort of push away feelings and thoughts that beckon to be looked at, to be seen for what they are, so that we learn about ourselves, not as Buddhas, but as human beings, living in a very complicated world with most complicated relationships, created by complicated thoughts and words and ideas that have been around for thousands of years. Don't we need to be intimate with that? What's going on in the mind and body, the interactive relationship between thought and emotion and thought. Without any idea what we are, not already print a stamp on it, what we are. But let it not be known. Let it not be labeled or sanctioned, sanctified, nor vilified either. Is that sufficient for that question? Can you discuss inquiry into the dreams we have when we're asleep at night? Sometimes there seems to be important information. Is it useful to try to understand symbolic language? No, I cannot. I'm not competent to discuss inquiry into dreams. It has never been my field of study. There are people who are very competent in this. And with them I would dialogue or inquire. Do you dialogue with a person who dream interprets, or do you submit to his or her interpretations? He or she as the interpreter and you as the interpretee, the dreamer. Is that the relationship? Of course I dream. Lots of dreams. I told one early in the retreat. And I've, on my own, after leaving school, the psychology study was not very satisfactory to me. Happened to find myself in a behavioristic department. Running little rats. It had one advantage. I got to love little white rats with pink ears, pink toes, soft, clean white fur, and very lovable and loving. If you take them in your hand and pet them, feed them, watch them run this crazy maze. So after leaving school, I read a lot of Freud's books. I read most of Jung's books, which I would not be able to tell you about. This is long ago. One thing, though, I remember is that in reading and studying Freud, I developed marvelous Freudian dreams. And in reading Jung, I developed marvelous Jungian dreams. Not making fun of it, but that was a fact. It happened that way. And I was interested in interpreting and so forth. I have had dreams which defied interpretation, in which, to my amazement, later on, something happened, something quite important in my life, like getting into a Zen center. I had dreamed that in symbolic language ahead of time. So I quite believe it's true that one dreams about future events. But the event happened, and the dream had anticipated it. That I feel dreaming it is enough. Whether I interpret it or not, something is happening in the body-mind. Dreaming and then also in real life. As to whether it is important to translate a symbol or to understand symbolic language, yes, it is very important. Do we understand our simple language, which is also symbolic? Language is symbol. Do we understand that the word bird is not this fluttering, flying thing, screeching or singing on the branch, preening itself? The blue shininess of the feather coat, nesting, feeding young, mating, migrating, and then out of nowhere appearing when there's still snow on the ground. Robins appear when there's still snow on the ground at times, eliciting a tremendous joy in the beholder. Spring is here, the robins are here. The word robin or bird doesn't cover that, does it? It's a symbol. A symbol being an abstraction from the real thing which cannot be captured in any symbol. No matter how elaborate, how beautiful, how realistic, it's still a symbol of what is unfathomable in its reality, its wholeness, its isness, call it what you will. The words, again, are not the real whatever is. So that's very important to understand. And if one begins by understanding it through dream language, there's maybe an opening to the fact that there are marvelous symbols in the human mind, lodged there for thousands of years, maybe hundreds of thousands of years. Denoting something beyond themselves. I find that keeping a journal reinforces the sense of a self who has experiences. Taking photographs or looking in a mirror also can do this. Please comment. We have at length talked in these 6 days of retreat, during talks, meetings, and groups, about this fantastic production of storyline through thought and image about ourselves. Partly put into this mind by others telling us what we are, how we should be, what our brothers and sisters are like, what our parents and grandparents were like, what our heroes and heroines are like, our gods and goddesses, and hell with its devils. This all is been fed through or filtered through thought into the brain. And out of that evolves the story of my life, not just as this, if I feel this way, individual person with a personal history I can remember, but as a member of a social class, of a race, a religious affiliation, a culture, a civilization, an eon, a time period, and so forth. We construct our world out of this story, which goes on as people begin to be quiet in a retreat and listen a bit to the thoughts that go on. It accompanies us everywhere and influences our behavior, our emotions and sensations and physical well-being or ill-being to a tremendous extent. Maybe unfathomed before it really comes under scrutiny and observation, and there's insight into it. Writing a journal is only one aspect of that. It is putting onto paper what is already running electrochemically through the body-mind. Taking pictures, taking photographs is only a different form of the pictures we take of a place and remember even if we have no photos. We can remember very clearly where we live. I remember our little house we just moved into a year ago, very clearly. Also, I remember the picture my sister took of it, which is very lovely. This is not a picture on paper anymore, it's in the mind. So not to single out taking photos and writing a journal as the factors in enhancing or reinforcing the sense of self. Everything we think about ourselves without insight or awareness that it is going on reinforces constantly this sense of self. There may be a moment which happens to people, to human beings, a moment of there being nothing, just openness, what's there, no conflict with it. And then the thought comes up, oh, I have had an insight. Now maybe I'm enlightened, I'll ask someone. You see the recreation of the I which was absent for a moment. And because it was absent, there was openness and beauty and no conflict and just what is. Maybe what is was thoughts about how bad I am, how good I am, that now reverberates as a memory and can be seen or heard like a bird chirping outside. But until thought says, this is mine, this is me, I've had it, I must keep it, I may lose it, until thought brings up these habitual patterns of thinking, there was no I, no sense of me. Just what is, which is not, which can be put into word symbols, but the word symbols are not the real thing. What the real thing is, we will never know. Can't know, because knowing is symbolizing, abstracting, committing to memory. Just like a photograph or a journal. Now, if you're writing a journal, as many people do, particularly people coming to retreat, often keep a journal. At the Zen Center, you would not have been allowed to do that. It was forbidden. Because you're just to be with yourself, or sometimes not so much with yourself as with your koan. And any interruption or distraction from that is going to hinder you on the path. So if you're writing a journal, and maybe this question arose out of journal writing in retreat, you wondered, what am I doing here? Just writing about myself all the time. Isn't that reinforcing the very thing that I want to be free of? Was that the line of thinking? I never say, even though it may be recorded like this in your brains, but I never say be free of yourself, get rid of it, conquer it or overcome it. I never say that. I couldn't, because this is self in action, wanting to overcome itself, to be a better self, a higher self, the conquering self, the victorious self, the spiritual self, whatever. It's more of the same in different symbolic language. So, all we are interested in is to find out about what we call this self, to catch it in action, to glimpse it as the storyline runs in the mind or on the paper, and the feelings go with it, feelings of elation, of high or low. To see that process and see it non-judgmentally is a very important ingredient in the seeing. No judgment, because judgment is again the emergence of the self, or the continuation of it, the reinforcement of it, now in the guise of a judger as well as the judged, both me, as idea, as storyline. Do you see it? Because beside the storyline of the ages, of the eons, there is no self. There's only walking, sitting, standing, eating, eliminating, being, relating, sex, and whatever. But it is accompanied day in and night out by story, dream, accounts, judgments, pictures galore, imagery, powerful imagery. What I am, what I should be, what hurts me, because the images they are hurting, it has been transgressed by someone insulting me. Can we watch that? This is all I'm asking. Can this all become more and more transparent to the inquiring mind, to the wondering mind, to the open mind, transparent of what it is all about, this me and self, the transparency of it, and yet the powerful, dominating effect of it when it is not seen. And maybe people who write journals have explained this to me. In writing something down, something can become more explicit, put into words, which was vaguely felt, and the endeavor of writing it out, putting it into words may clarify something to a degree. Maybe to the degree that what has been clarified in words can, at this or some other moment, be directly seen happening. That is the sort of the fringe benefit of intellectual understanding about, in this case, the self. That by understanding it intellectually, or in a journal, maybe more than intellectually, trying to grope for words to put something down that is being observed, happening, or happened, there may be a greater chance or likelihood of seeing this thing directly, again or for the first time. It isn't the first time, because to write it down, one has already seen something, only became words so quickly, ideas so fast, that the immediacy was sheltered, shaded out, Am I talking too fast? So if you're interested in journal writing, but also interested in what this does to one, then watch it. Find out for yourself. Probe your motives for writing it. I wrote a journal when I was very young, in my teens, maybe, early teens. And if I'm correct in remembering that far back, I felt becoming very interesting to myself by writing it. And that I cherished and garnered from that. Because I usually felt very inferior. Very brilliant parents, a brilliant sister, the youngest in the family. Told a lot of things about myself by others. I wasn't this or that, not as good as, and always worrying. So I wrote in a journal, I became interesting to myself. The journal was my audience, my approver, my reinforcer. Albeit I realized I wasn't writing very well. It wasn't good. I could tell that. It was very much hindered by my motive to be somebody. So it's up to us to look. We can. Nobody else can do it for us, to watch as we write, or as we pick out the journal, or as the thought occurs, I should write this in my journal. What goes with it? What storyline about the storyline? Maybe it's a whole conglomerate of things. Find out, watch it. There is beauty and intelligence in just watching simply and non-judgmentally what is going on from moment to moment. And sometimes in simple, non-judgmental watching, not only an intelligence emerges about living as a human being, but also a new kindliness. Kindliness toward oneself and others. We were just talking about that this morning. Someone mentioned it. Coming upon this kindliness. And I like the word. Often we talk about love. I don't like that word. It's too hallmarked. Kindliness is a nice word because it has that word kind in it, which is not only gentle, but also we are all of the same kind. Maybe that's not its origin, but this is what appealed. Kindliness toward all humankind. Because what we observe in ourselves, without judgment, openly, is what is going on in human beings of the past and of the present. Can we listen to the click of a tape recorder? Click, 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 click. Like a clucking bird. Fearing that I'm not getting enough, and that I must make up for those times when I felt I did not get enough, is my daily companion. Be it food or sex, or possessions or experiences of every kind, this wanting to make sure that I get my share and more accompanies almost every moment of my life. Can it come to an end? It's important, isn't it, to come upon this in the first place, become aware of it, to want one's fair share and the driving power of that. Glancing over on other dishes, do they have more than I do? Do I have less than they have? And the dynamics of it, which shades out attention. But there must have been some attention there to report this, or else one wouldn't be able to do that. One would just continue living without interruption in this getting one's fair share and more of everything. One could make a vow, couldn't one, a resolution, to renounce that kind of behavior. People have tried it for centuries, maybe more than centuries, to renounce, because finding greed in oneself and this unbearable comparison, may vow to let it all go, give it all away, live in poverty, withdraw from people so I can't compare how much they get and how much less I get, or needing to surpass them. Does that work? If that pattern is not really transparent, clear, and seen through completely, and we'll talk more about that later, it will operate in a new environment. I am more poverty beholden than anyone else. I'm purer than others. It'll keep on going. And others who may work with me in my environment of renunciation must also give up. I will be stern with them as I'm stern with myself. Patterns survive the forms in which we live and imprint themselves on new forms in the same way. So this person says, will this ever stop? Can this ever stop? Needing to get my fair share. I know this feeling, incidentally. I grew up in the war. And did we gaze around on dishes? Who had more? My husband, who grew up during the Depression and very, very hard times for his family, he says his father went without lunch, so there would be enough for the family. He has a very similar habit to myself. I'm only recently trying to drop it, sometimes to his dismay. When cooking the oatmeal and dishing it out, he goes, from one spoon on his dish, one on mine, one on his, one on mine, one on his, one on mine. Recently, I've just sort of scooped it out into each dish. We share a grapefruit in the morning. We break it open, and the bigger half, one slice is taken off and cut into two, and each one. We laugh about it, but we keep doing it. That's the fair share syndrome. I like it when, in Springwater, when there's very little of something good, like guacamole or so, a tape is put on the table, please be moderate, or 2 spoonfuls each, because invariably somebody will load up their dish, the first one, and then there's not enough for the last one. So I like this thing of keeping fair share in mind. It's deep within, it's deeply programmed. So can it ever stop? Why not? Why not? It may diminish or stop or not even be remembered when the energy of living doesn't run through all of those channels. Those predisposed, preformed channels of me and mine and my childhood. I read recently in a psychology book a very interesting concept, this early conditioning being called, it's a mouthful, early precognitive commitment. But it was interesting, doves or pigeons raised in an environment in which there was nothing but horizontal lines, and another group raised in an environment with only vertical lines. The pigeons in the horizontal group never perceived verticality, didn't see it. The experiment was not described in detail. It was just given as a support how our perceptive apparatus is also conditioned by how we grow up. The vertical pigeons, incidentally, could not see any horizontality, only responded to vertical stimuli, even though they had perfectly good eyes. So the not getting enough may be one of those early cognitive commitments, or conditionings. It's just a new word. And can that ever stop the whole thing? Because this is just one aspect. There's so much. How we think, how we prejudice against others, how we consider certain people our own and others our enemies, foes, or at least not us, not one of us. This is established very early and sits very deeply. So can it ever stop? Person didn't ask forever, because then I wouldn't even enter into it. But there is nothing forever. That's another idea of the human mind. But when energy, which is life energy, energy which abounds throughout this universe and throughout our life, when that gathers in listening and looking and being here now, then it doesn't funnel and channel into all of this conditioning. And then one may find all of a sudden in the eating line, it doesn't matter whether I have as much as someone else. Not that I'm generous, not that I renounce, there's no principle involved. It's just the energy of nowness and the beauty of a warm tortilla, whatever it is, and beans on it and stuff. Not more than the other, less than the other, because here there is such abundance. incredible abundance of food in this place. Will it come back if there is scarcity? You have to see, you have to live, you have to look, you have to be there. And maybe when you're really there, these early patterns don't have the same power. They may raise their heads, knock on the door, or want to come up and have maybe already spilled over, but they're seen. And they're seen for their narrowness, their painfulness, their prison-like quality. And at this moment, one need not live in a prison. There's the vastness of space, and light and air, and people moving in and out. And at such a time, there is no effort to suppress a pattern. It's seen for what it is, but it has lost its sting. But raising a question such as this and arousing an interest will make for more attention, because I want to find out. So I have to look. If I'm a scientist, I want to find out something about rats. I have to watch them. I can't just think about them. So if I'm interested in myself, not just some rat proving something about a human being, but here, watching myself, if I'm interested in this pattern of comparing and wanting more, constantly accompanying me wherever I go, I watch it, and maybe in the watching some energy already gathers, which does not leak into this pattern, this circuit. Find out. It's available, it's there for the doing. Not out of principle, but out of interest and concern. Please talk about God. You didn't get to it yesterday. This may mean late lunch and a raised anxiety whether we'll all get our fair share. When I was little, I didn't question whether there was a God. I just knew there was one, because people around me talked about him. My parents were not religious, not church-going. They did not have any dogma that they put forth, but they talked about der liebe Gott, means dear God. Sometimes, maybe my grandmother more, or our maid. But it was in their mouths too, here and there. And more than what they said, I came into possession of a little Bible story book with illustrations. And even though I was never much of a reader, I was very much of a picture looker. I loved to look at pictures. And for each of the Bible stories there was a picture. Creation of the earth, God flying over the waters, light, and right now the Sistine Chapel pictures come to mind too, something like that. Maybe a person was inspired by it. And then of course there were the less benign scenes of the sending out. Oh, first Adam being tempted by Eve with an apple, and that snake in there. Expulsion from the paradise. I can still see these pictures, although a little bit mixed up with those in the Sistine Chapel. One of the most concerning ones and worrying ones was the two sacrifices by the two sons. What were their names? One sacrificed meat, and God found the smoke rising pleasant to him. His cloud was hovering over that sacrifice. The other brother, who sacrificed grain, because it wasn't a question of vegetarian and meat eating in terms of the book, and not in terms of me either. What bothered me was the rejection of the one and the favoring of the other. And then there was a picture of Sodom and Gomorrah. The woman who looked back, it was a woman, wasn't it? Turning into a pillar of salt. Also, Adam and Eve hiding skimpily behind the tree of knowledge. And God seeing them anyways. All of this instilled in me a holy fear of this dear God. I couldn't really trust him. It was too frightening for me. His anger, his vengeance. Then comes to mind a picture from a songbook about an angel going about at night, taking care of children, and a little child lost, sleeping peacefully in a meadow, and an angel with big wings lit up. A little child is lit up in the dark of night through the shining wings of this angel. That, to me, was more something I could relate to, as you say to today, as you put it today. But, and I felt more comfortable with Jesus. Even there too, always some fear mixed in of the last judgment, condemnation. People sent to hell, and others being with God and Jesus because they were good. What about those bad ones? There were very dark or unclear doubts and fears and misgivings. Then, of course, I've related it elsewhere during the bombing attacks on the city where I lived and the Jewish persecution. My mother was Jewish. And the wholesale slaughter of young people, middle-aged people, old people going to war, not coming back. One information after another. In the house we lived, in the apartment house, he was killed. He died in Russia. He sank in a submarine and so forth. But particularly on one night when a bomb hit very close to our house, and the whole thing of an air raid, the shaking, and you sit there in a cellar which isn't even safe. I had no one or nothing to pray to. The whole faith collapsed. It didn't make sense anymore. Nothing made sense anymore. Why we live, why this goes on, why there is no interference with it. Why there wasn't any salvation from it, which I didn't feel. I was yearning for, but it was not there. It was guilt. I was always felt guilty for everything. I'd done something wrong. No salvation from that through faith. So this shattered my early belief in a God. And yet it maintained the question of what is the meaning of this utterly meaningless life? Utterly chaotic, cruel, horrendously violent, disregarding of each other, no kindliness in all of that. What's the meaning of it? Why? Why be born into this only to die under a rubble of bombed houses, or killed at the front, or tortured to death in a concentration camp? So this question about, does life have any meaning? And interestingly enough, I never said no, it doesn't, even though it didn't. There was something of a wondering starting very early, inquiry, if you will. And I asked all kinds of people. My sister, who knew so much more. I read books, I began to read and study. And then leave the school and read more. A lot of books were sort of like stepping stones. Interesting. One could discard false beliefs, but I still didn't know, didn't understand. And through this sort of book stepping from one book to another, and it's amazing how the right books fall into one's hands at the right time. I read Evelyn Underhill's Mysticism, all kinds of books of that sort, and then the 3 Pillars of Zen, where there was a given way where I could sit down and find out for myself. This is how I started. Not so much anymore to find if there's a God or not. The absence of God, the non-theistic aspect of Buddhism agreed with me. But people keep asking about God. Particularly I mentioned it in Poland, where there's very strong religious history of Catholicism. Not that the people who come to retreat are Catholic, but they wanted to know whether God was inside or outside. So, if this is our question, what is God? Is there a God? Inside or outside may not make a difference to some, but is there God? Then let's keep that question alive and really ask it fundamentally of ourselves. Not go, of course, maybe we'll have to do that first, go to all the scriptures, to all the traditions, read all about God and in the biblical and the different religious sacred books and the theologies. And you may find that you still only have the symbol if you understand something about how the mind operates. And the symbol does not satisfy the hunger, because it's not real. It may have tremendous emanations of energy and instill tremendous inspiration, but that ebbs and wanes. Do you want to find out whether there is God, or what's true, what's real, what is beyond thought, not graspable symbolically? You have to inquire and listen inwardly, outwardly, quietly, undisturbed by what other people say, undisturbed by your own belief systems, which is not easy, because this belief sits so deep. We take them so for granted. It takes very fine discernment to come upon the subtle beliefs and let go of them in this inquiry. What is God? And then maybe let go of that word. It's a heavily loaded word. What is? Let go of that. Just listen quietly, inwardly, to what's there. Listening quietly, inwardly, and one has seen through the thoughts and the me that is the energy right now does not travel in those channels and circuits. It's gathered in wondering, in listening inwardly, outwardly. Then, as I think we already said yesterday, listening inwardly, quietly, with energy gathered. There's nothing. And nothing, as you open your eyes and look, is everything. The motor, the road, the eucalyptus trees, the people sitting here, the sun shining, the moon at night, the ice on the back steps melting into water. Honk. But not me and mine. It's not mine. No need to bring oneself in relationship with it. It's there. But you can't get a hold of it. The moment you do, it's gone. It becomes a symbol. But not trying to grasp it, get hold of it. It's whole. Whole, holy. Not the word. We will end here for today.